Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to click like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Your support helps us create more awesome videos for you. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Enjoy the video. I've lived with the sound for 11 years now. 11 years since I first heard the sad murmurs come up from deep inside me. 11 years since the crash. I don't remember much from before the damage, probably about the same amount any kid does from their first 7 years of being alive. But I do remember every part of the day that everything was different for me. Maybe the badness of it all burned it into my head. My mom was taking me home from playing ball, and some of her hair was over the back of the seat. I was behind her, and when she wouldn't stop for a sweet treat, I took some of the light-colored hair and pulled hard, not paying attention for a second by the hurt in her head, and turning to scold me, she went through a stop sign when she shouldn't have. I'll never forget the scared look on the young lady's face in the other car when she was going to hit us, nor her yelling face turning towards the back seat before we crashed. My dad was in charge of the best place to get better in the city, and he made sure that we got the best doctors and the best care. The people in the other car, a young mom and her child, were not so lucky. Still, it was amazing that I didn't die. The hit was right behind our car's driver's side, right where I was. I should have been squished, but I did not come out okay from what happened. My face was cut up by glass and metal. My throat hurt, so my sound was changed forever. My eyes so bad that I couldn't see well. Though losing most of my sight was probably good, as I didn't look like me. With very strong glasses, I was able to see just enough to be very scared, the only time that I ever felt strong enough to look with them on. My folks found me crying and calling myself a bad thing that morning. A few days after, they told me that we were going away, that they were wanting to not have me go back to school, and the hard questions or mean words from the kids that knew me before. Far away, we went from one side of the land to another, leaving everything, including all of the pictures of me taken before the crash, which my mom and dad said they did to be nice, to not remind me of how I used to be. We were starting over, and they seemed set on talking about the crash and how I looked from it as little as they could. In truth, it seemed at times that they wanted to not think it ever happened. My mom had some small hurts too, but she became very good at hiding her marks with stuff on her face. And both of my folks would not tell anyone that asked about my hurts other than to say we were in a car crash, that I was a good little kid whose hurts shouldn't be who I was, and that they would not talk about it more. Often I liked how they were, as they worked hard to make sure that my being a kid was no different than any other. But there were days that I wished they would at least talk to me about it, like the night that I first heard the sound. 6 months after the crash, we were in our new house, and I wasn't quite used to where things were. So, it was not a shock when I woke up in the dark of my room at some point late at night. Without my glasses, I wasn't able to see the numbers on the time teller to tell me what time it was, but the sound of bugs outside my window and no light told me that it was way past when I should be sleeping. And it wouldn't have mattered much if I could see the time anyway, as I was not able to turn my head to look at it. My body was stuck. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't even move a finger. I was very scared. I breathed fast, and I tried to call out for my folks, but I couldn't make a noise. And then I heard it. "Who are you?" A kid-like whisper went through my head, a sound both known and new, coming from somewhere deep inside my brain. "What?" I thought back, still not able to say words out loud. "You shouldn't be here." It sounded just as scared as I was, shaking, close to crying. Then, without warning, my left arm moved. Without me telling it, or me wanting it to, I felt it raise up off the bed and close its hand. Open and closed, The fingers went in and out like trying to get something in the air. "You shouldn't be here." The sound screamed at me, and trying to save myself, I yelled back at it in my mind, "Stop, go away," wanting it to go with every bit of strength in my small body. And my arm fell back down. Then, fast, as quick as it had come, I could move again. Wet, I threw my covers off and ran for my folks' room as fast as I could. One small good thing to my new way was that I could go in the dark better than others. Most days, I didn't even bother with my glasses, as they gave me a head hurt, and I got very used to finding my way without seeing. The way from my room to my mom and dad's was in my head, and I was shaking them up less than a minute after I could move again. It wasn't easy for me to tell them what had happened, as they were having to figure out the words I got out by breathing hard. But after, they put together my story of the sound, and how I could not move my body for a bit. I thought that they'd be scared too, that they might even take me to the doctor. But I was shocked when they didn't do much. It's not like they were mean. They did make me feel better. My mom touched my back while my dad told about sleep freeze, saying that that was very likely what I'd had. And they kept saying that it was an okay thing. Even as a young kid, I could tell there was something not right with what they said. Dad said that sleep freeze could have things that are not real, making the sound make sense and not being able to move, showing why I was stuck when I woke up. But it didn't say how my arm had moved by itself, or the odd grabbing it kept doing. He had no answers for that, other than to tell me that I was fine, that I was safe, that the sound hadn't hurt me, and that the worst part of it all was only the fear it made. But he did tell me that it might happen again, and with that, he gave some words. "If the sound comes back, and you find that you're not able to move, just do what you did now, okay? Tell it to go away, and that you're the boss," he said. And, with no other help or plans on how to deal with it, when it did come back again and again, that's what I did. As I got bigger, I learned to live with it. My folks were not going to talk about it other than that first night, other than to say my dad's words again, and it only sometimes changed how I was. By the time I was 12, I had heard it on 9 different occasions, always at night, always waking me up from a deep sleep. The physical manifestations were identical each instance. Complete immobility other than my phantom arm grasping at the air. But the phrases it wormed through my mind changed. Not fair, leave, your fault, stolen, stolen. Sometimes it was just a whimper, a low, sad sound that made my chest ache even though I didn't understand why. Other times it was a confused jumble of words like a radio skipping between stations. Mommy? Where? Hurt? Cold. These fragments were even more disturbing than the clear accusations. But every time it looped back around to, "You shouldn't be here." And though each time I was able to fend it off by telling it to leave, and that I was in control, every occurrence resulted in pure terror for me. No matter how many times my parents repeated that it was sleep paralysis and there was nothing to fear long term, I was still worried that one day it might take over for good. That one day, I would become a passenger in my own body. Especially considering that I didn't understand why it was happening. As I mentioned, I didn't have many memories from before the accident, but I was certain that it had never happened before then. I surmised that there must have been something about the wreck that triggered it. And it wasn't until 5 years after it happened that I first heard the term survivor's guilt. My mom was watching a daytime talk show, and they were interviewing guests that had survived traumatic accidents, one of whom described something similar to what I was experiencing. A voice in their head, nagging them for still being alive when others had died. Listening to their story, I found myself empathizing with them. Maybe, subconsciously, I was punishing myself for causing the accident by distracting my mother. Maybe, "You shouldn't be here," was the voice telling me that I shouldn't be alive when it was my fault that other people weren't. but it wasn't a perfect fit for everything the voice said. What did it mean when it told me to leave? Or said stolen? It was more difficult to view those words the lens of survivor's guilt. Yet, it was the best theory I had, and the one that I carried until I was 15. Until I met my best pal, Arn, in first-year room. The first real pal that I made after the wreck. He didn't care how bad my face was or that I couldn't see. A bit of an outcast himself, we fast became close, and I told everything about myself to him. Even the details of how I got hurt, and of the whispers in my head. My dad had told me explicitly that I should never speak about the voice to anyone else. Really, he told me never to speak of it at all, but especially not to mention it outside of our house. But I believed Arn. He'd told me about his struggles at home, about his mom's drinking and his dad's neglect. I didn't think it fair to hold back any details of my life from him. So, it was Arn that gave me my second theory on the origins of the sound, as he didn't think it was a simple case of survivor's guilt. He thought it taking. Arn was much more into the world of the dark and creepy than I was. He suggested that the spirit of the kid that had perished in the other vehicle may have searched for the nearest living body it could find after it had been ripped from its own and crept inside. In his words, inhabitation was a much better explanation for what was happening to me than survivor's guilt. And for the first time, I considered that, possibly, what I was hearing wasn't a manifestation from my own mind, but was someone else speaking with me. It would explain why the sound hadn't aged with me over time. Why, every night that it returned to me, it still sounded like a scared and angry child. And I had to admit that every phrase the voice had uttered made more sense when viewed from that angle. We theorized that the boy's soul didn't understand what had happened to it. That on nights when I was particularly vulnerable, fast asleep and emotionally peaceful, it could push me aside and briefly gain control of my body. That it was confused and thought I was the intruder. Leave, stolen, you shouldn't be here. But, though it illuminated why the voice might be saying some of the things that it was, our hypothesis also pointed to a grim conclusion. The boy wanted me out. My fear of one day becoming a guest within my own body grew. Previously, I'd worried that it was just my own brain that would disconnect its physical control from my mental directions. But now, I pondered the frightful possibility that there was a spirit trapped within me that was actively trying to take over. However, in addition to the dread, the prospect also filled me with a deep sadness. As the voice had forcefully reminded me several times, it was my fault that it was in this situation. I had distracted my mother. I had caused the accident. It would still be happily residing in its original host, if not for me. I asked Arn if there was anything we could do to try and free it, surmising that sending it on would be preferable for it than forever residing in an alien world. He recommended that we try a talking board, thinking that we could talk to the stuck soul and help it get what had happened, thinking we might even be able to get it to leave once it realized that it did not fit in this world now. Yet, over the next 3 years we made more than 50 attempts to communicate with the spirit directly, resulting in more than 50 failures. No matter the time of day, the ambiance we set, the music, the scents, the incantations, the boy would not speak to us, but he still came to me at night. 8 more visits during those 3 years, each time angrier than the last. Go, taken, mine. And each time he became harder to push out. Each time he held control for longer. Arn was sleeping at my house during the most new time, and was almost killed when he tried to stop the takeover. He had woken up to the distressed noises of me struggling for power over how I moved, and saw my arm raise from the bed, making the repetitive, squeezing motion I'd told to him. Knowing what was happening, he tried to shake me from the trance, but was not able to get me free. And then, I witnessed my own body attack him. Throttling blows landed on Arn's chest and face. I sprang from the bed and pinned him to the floor. Hands that I couldn't stop put themselves around his throat and began to crush down on his windpipe. "Go! I'm the boss! Go! I'm the boss!" I shouted inside my head, desperately trying to regain power over my fingers before Arn died, and I felt my grasp begin to loosen just as his eyes were rolling back in his head. Collapsing onto the floor next to Arn, I heard him coughing and trying to get air while the sound screamed a final, defiant appeal before it receded to the depths of my consciousness. Give it back. Neither Arn nor I slept the remainder of that night. I apologized over and over for what I'd done to him, but he told me that it wasn't necessary. He knew that it wasn't really me that had attacked him, but he began to withdraw from our friendship. The next few weeks were a blur of strained silences and avoided eye contact. One afternoon, I found Arn sitting alone in the cafeteria, hunched over a book. I approached him, my heart pounding. "Arn," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "Can we talk?" He looked up, his expression a mixture of fear and pity. That hurt more than the fear. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice flat. I just can't, okay? I can't be around you anymore. It's not safe." "But it wasn't me. You know that," I pleaded, my voice cracking. He shook his head. "I know you didn't do it, but something in you did, and I can't risk that again." He looked down at his book, his shoulders slumped. "Just leave me alone, please." I stood there for a moment, frozen, the cafeteria noise fading into a dull roar. I wanted to argue, to explain, to beg him to understand, but the look on his face told me it was hopeless. He was scared, and I couldn't blame him. I turned and walked away, feeling more alone than I'd ever had before. Up to that point, I think Arn had found my affliction to be a something to wonder about, something fun and not known to look into. However, the attack had shown the truth of it to him, and he became just as scared of it as I was. And any time that I asked him to be with me after that night, he said no. The sound took the only real pal that I had, and it made me very mad. 11 years had passed since the crash. 11 years the sound had making me feel bad for what I did. I needed to be free of it, so I put my story on the net, on some places for not normal things, asking if anyone could help, looking for someone that talks to spirits, or maybe even someone that could pull the bad spirit from me. I spent hours scouring online forums, posting in groups dedicated to the paranormal, hauntings, and unexplained phenomena. Most of the responses were useless. People suggesting sage cleansings, crystals, or telling me I was delusional. Some were outright cruel, mocking my story and my appearance. I almost gave up, convinced that I was doomed to live with this thing forever. Then I stumbled upon a smaller, more obscure forum, a place where people shared deeply personal, often unbelievable experiences. I hesitated for a long time before posting, fearing more ridicule, but the desperation finally outweighed the fear. I poured out my story, leaving out no detail, no matter how terrifying or embarrassing. For days there was nothing. Then a few responses trickled in. Most were the then. For days there was nothing. Then a few responses trickled in. Most were the usual dismissive comments, but one caught my eye. It was from someone with the username Seeker72, and it simply said, "I've heard of cases like this. Not spirits, something else. DM me." I messaged Seeker72, my hands trembling. We exchanged a few messages, and I found myself feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in a long time. Seeker72 didn't offer easy solutions or mystical cures. Instead, they asked detailed questions about the accident, my medical history, and my parents' reactions. They seemed to be looking for something specific, a pattern I couldn't see. And yesterday, someone responded, "I've been looking for you," began the cryptic words in my mail. "It's not a spirit you're hearing." Below those words, two pictures were put, one of my folks with me before the crash, and one of a young lady with two boys. A yelling face went through my mind. The young lady before her car hit ours. And here she was again, smiling with her sons next to her on both sides. The older boy I didn't know, but the younger was known. I went between the two pictures and saw how much my younger self looked like her younger son. Same age, same hair look, same eye look. We might be called brothers too. But it wasn't just how we were the same that bothered me. It'd been over 10 years since I'd looked with my glasses on. 10 years since I'd seen my face. Or was it his face? I closed my eyes and made the not clear picture from that morning up out of my head, and my heart went fast when it came clear. The image wasn't just blurry, it was fragmented, like a shattered mirror pieced back together imperfectly. I remembered the feeling of the glass shards against my skin, the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. I remembered the overwhelming pressure, the feeling of being crushed, and then nothing. A blank space in my memory, a void where the impact should have been. And then, slowly, painfully, the image of that face in the mirror reformed. It wasn't my face. Not really. Below the bad marks, under the bumps, it wasn't the face of the boy with my folks looking back at me. It was his. Shaking. I took my computer with me to the place to wash and looked at myself for the first time in a long time. Then, making big the picture of the mom and her boys on the screen, I thought what the younger would have looked like at 18. And he looked back at me. That moment, a bad head hurt went through my head, and I fell down. Holding my head, I yelled in pain while some pictures went through my brain. I was seeing the crash again, but not how I saw it. I was seeing it from his way. It wasn't just a visual replay. It was a full sensory immersion. I felt the hard plastic of the car seat beneath me, the slight nausea from eating too much candy earlier that day. I smelled the faint scent of my mother's perfume, a comforting, familiar fragrance. I heard the cheerful melody of a children's song playing on the radio, a song I vaguely remembered from my own childhood, but couldn't quite place. Then the screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal, and my mother's scream, a sound that ripped through me with a force that felt utterly new, yet achingly familiar. My mom's car went into the road and it was too late for his mom to stop. She yelled and reached for the back seat where he was, and he stretched forward with his left hand to grab her arm. He was closing his fist to squeeze it just as the hit threw her out of the car, and a moment later, everything was dark. He woke up in the place to get better weeks later, but was no longer the one in charge of his body. A new boss had been put in. I'd been put in. The boy could hear my thoughts. He could see what I remembered. He knew someone had taken control of his life, but he couldn't do anything about it. It was like being trapped in a nightmare, forced to watch helplessly as my life unfolded through someone else's eyes. I saw my own parents, their faces distorted with a grief that felt alien, yet resonated deep within me. I saw them talking to doctors, their words muffled and indistinct, but their body language conveying a desperate hope mixed with profound despair. And he watched as a man he didn't know shook hands with a doctor, saying thank you for saving his child's life, thanking him for doing such a big thing to do it. As the pain in my head began to go away and the picture from the hospital was changed with the floor I'd fallen on, I at last got what the sound was. I understood what my dad had done. I understood why my folks had never taken me to a helper or to someone to talk to about the sound. Why they had been so strong in saying I should tell it that I was in charge when it came back. They knew what it was. In the boys' memories, it was a brain doctor that my dad was shaking hands with. They were old pals. He was the one that saved my life, though he'd only saved part of me. The other boy hadn't died that day, like they'd all lied to me. I had, all but my brain, which they moved to the living boy's body. He wasn't the one that didn't belong. I was. Lying there on the floor, my mind was full of the bad truth that it now had. I'd made the boy stuck in his own body. Crying, I got up and looked again at the words that had broken how I saw things. and I found a few more short words under the pictures. You killed my mom. You took my brother's body. I will get you. I don't know what to do. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I crushed my glasses last night, never wanting to see even a bit of my face again. I thought about trying to share control with my body mate, but I don't know how to do that. I'm scared of what he'll do if I let him. Because now that I know for sure he's there, now that I know the sound isn't left alive guilt or a lost spirit, I can feel him. He's there, in the back of our head. Scared, mad, and I can feel his hate, a burning coal growing. He knows his brother is looking for him, and he's fighting to take over.